I want to be clear that my actual recommendation for buying GPUs this month is you should probably wait unless you absolutely have to buy right now, for a couple of reasons. Number one, the 50 series is currently rumored to launch in January with the 5090 and the 5080. And then there's really recent rumors pointing to the next step down coming in February and the step down after that coming in March, meaning that this could be a much faster release process than what we saw with the 40 series, because I think they're planning on clearing out the 40 series stock faster than they cleared out the 30 series stock last generation. So they might not need to drag out the launches over quite such a long period of time. To be clear, this is all leaks and rumors at this point. None of this is official. However, that's what our best guess currently is off of the information we have. Now, that also means that we're seeing evidence of 40 series cards likely getting clearance type pricing around the holiday season. So Black Friday, going into the Christmas season, trying to clear out the remaining 40 series stock before it becomes devalued by the 50 series. So if you don't want to wait for the 50 series, then waiting for those types of deals in November and December probably make more sense than buying right now in October. So again, we can't predict for sure what's going to happen in the future, but there's a very good chance that you'll get better deals on the 40 series starting around Black Friday, or just get better performance per dollar when the new generation arrives early next year. So that's my actual recommendation for what to do if you're thinking about buying a GPU in October. Don't, just wait. That being said, some people need to buy right now or want to buy right now. So if you're going to, what's my overall recommendations? Let's go ahead and do a quick summary real fast at the start, and then I'll explain a bit more about why. Okay, if you're buying around $200, I think you should buy an RX 6600. If you're buying something more expensive than that, I recommend stepping up to a 7700 XT at around $350. If you're buying something more expensive than that, I recommend stepping up to a RX 6800 XT at $430. If you're buying something more expensive than that, I recommend stepping up to NVIDIA cards because their feature set starts to make more sense at this performance tier. With the 4070 Super coming in a little under $600. And if you have to spend more money than this, I would maybe justify going up to a 4070 Ti Super 16 gigabyte, which comes in a little under $800. And I really don't recommend spending any more than this in October of 2024, because once you start getting into the 4080 and 4090, these are definitely being supplanted in like January of next year, probably getting a lot more performance for similar pricing. It just probably isn't a good thing to do. Not that you couldn't. Now, why did I make these decisions? And did you notice that I recommended NVIDIA cards at the higher performance and price tiers and AMD cards at the lower performance and price tiers? That's because some of NVIDIA's feature set becomes more compelling at the higher performance tiers than it is at the lower performance tiers. And also at the lower performance tiers, well, you know what, let's just jump down here. I do think that if you're buying right now, buying around the $200 mark isn't a disaster because I'm not sure we're going to see a 50 series card at around the $200 mark, meaning I'm not sure we're going to get as much shakeup in these absolute lowest price and performance tiers. If you are going to buy a GPU, I do recommend at least buying the RX 6600 and not going much lower than this, and check the used market if you can't afford $200 for a new GPU. Otherwise, I think you're just too far off the performance in modern games. Okay, so why the RX 6600? Well, its nearest competition from NVIDIA price-wise is the RTX 3050, and you'd want to get at least the 8 gigabyte version, not the cut down 6 gigabyte version, which performs worse as well as having less VRAM. The 8 gigabyte 3050 comes in at $200, so it's exactly the same price. But the AMD card is so much more performant that you could even throw on DLSS quality on the 3050, and oftentimes the RX 6600 without using DLSS will outperform it at native resolution versus upscaling. So that really nullifies the main advantage for NVIDIA at the lower performance tiers, which is DLSS upscaling. But if DLSS upscaling only boosts your performance to around a tie to native rendering resolution on the RX 6600, then it's not really an advantage at all. Also, NVIDIA's other big selling point, which is ray tracing, just isn't that meaningful of a feature if kicking on RT reflections, not even RT Ultra, not even RT Overdrive, but just RT reflections on Cyberpunk, throws you all the way down to 36 FPS at 1080p. So the ray tracing performance on the 3050 just isn't a selling point. Yes, is it faster than the 6600 at this ray tracing test? Absolutely. But in reality, I just wouldn't recommend using those settings. It would make a lot more sense to go to something like, maybe you wanted to just play at ultra settings. And if you just play at ultra settings rather than the... apparently we're gonna lose my internet connection on my own video here. Well, that's nice. Well, anyway, I'd already showed you that the performance is faster here, and apparently that's not gonna load in. Whatever. How about we go into a relative performance chart from Tech Power Up? So let's take a look at this. So if we set the 3050 as the baseline here, and we scroll up to the RX 6600, they have it at 26% faster on average. Now, it varies game to game. Some games it's more than 26% faster, some it's less. But in general, it's significantly faster. Now, my next recommendation was to go up to at least the RX 7700 XT. Now, why am I recommending that? Well, its closest priced competition, if we pop into the price searching here, is the 4060 Ti 8GB. The 8GB 4060 Ti starts at $385, whereas the 7700 XT costs less at $350. But not only does it cost less, it offers 12 gigabytes of VRAM instead of 8, which is a meaningful difference. Also, the 7700 XT is generally faster than the 8GB 4060 Ti, so that in light ray tracing workloads, it actually just falls back and ties the 4060 Ti. Kind of nullifying that big ray tracing advantage. Now, if you did want to go ahead and use a heavier duty ray tracing test, you would get better performance on the 4060 Ti. But once again, the heavier ray tracing stuff, like if I want to go Alan Wake 2 1440p high with RT high, even using DLSS upscaling at the balanced setting, which at 1440p I find a little bit borderline, a little bit aggressive, the 8GB 4060 Ti is holding on at 29 FPS. It's not even a 60 FPS average. And considering it's falling well below the performance of the 16GB 4060 Ti, it's showing that the 8GB of VRAM is kind of hampering it here, because ray tracing often uses a lot of VRAM. Not only that, even sometimes when you're not using ray tracing, you can be running out of VRAM on an 8GB card. Here we're looking at Horizon Forbidden West at 1440p very high, no upscaling, and the 7700 XT is cruising right along at 72 FPS average, making it 33% faster than the 4060 Ti 8GB in this test, and the 1% lows are an absolute disaster for the 8GB card, only hitting 36 FPS. Now, what's going on here? Once again, spilling over the VRAM buffer on the 8GB card, which means it's having to access system memory to load things in, which takes more time, more latency than getting it out of the VRAM, which slows things down and can manifest itself in stuttery gameplay, or in missing textures if it's not affecting the performance. We can definitely identify that this is a VRAM issue because the 16GB 4060 Ti is significantly outperforming, especially in the 1% lows compared to the 8GB model, and even in the averages. That doesn't happen in games where you're not spilling, or settings where you're not spilling over the VRAM buffer. That being said, you could always turn down graphics settings to stay within the 8GB VRAM buffer. And if I do that, for example, going to 1440p high settings, instead of very high settings, now notice the 8GB and 16GB 4060 Ti's are completely tied. I mean, a little advantage in the 1% lows still for the 16GB model. But in general, this is showing that there's not a significant VRAM issue right at these settings for the 8GB card. That being said, the 7700 XT is still faster. It's just reduced its lead to 16%, although a bit more than that in the 1% lows, because again, it's possible that the 1% lows are still having a little bit of an issue with the 8GB card here. And again, this is not, the very high settings, which I was showing before, is not an unreasonable way to play this game. The 16GB 4060 Ti has the performance to play this at 60 FPS with no upscaling. And the 7700 XT is hitting 72 FPS with no upscaling. These are not unreasonable graphics settings for this tier of card, and yet the 8 gigabytes of VRAM is hampering the 8 gigabyte card here. So people accuse me sometimes of like blowing the 8 gigabyte VRAM thing out of proportion. So I do want to be very clear. You can just turn down graphics settings and 8 gigabytes will be fine. That being said, why are you paying more for a card that has to turn down graphics settings? It just doesn't make sense to me. So the 7700 XT costs less, performs better, and doesn't have the VRAM issue. The heavy-duty ray tracing isn't playable on the 4060 Ti 8GB, and the lighter ray tracing workloads, it doesn't really perform that much better, as we already showed. So my recommendation here is the 7700 XT. And if some of you are like, oh, I'll just buy the 16GB 4060 Ti, the problem there is that the 6800 XT costs the same. You can get a 6800 XT from AMD for $430. The 4060 Ti 16GB costs $430 for the lowest price model, meaning they're exactly the same price. But if you look at their overall performance, the 6800 XT crushes the 4060 Ti 16GB by often over 30% margins. Again, so if you kicked on DLSS on the 4060 Ti but not on the 6800 XT, you know, you're catching up to the performance, but having to render below native rendering resolution in order to do so. And again, we've already established that the ray tracing performance on 4060 Ti class products is not anything to write home about. So again, I think the 6800 XT here makes a lot of sense. But when I went past this point, that's where I started recommending some NVIDIA models, because past the 6800 XT, which again we had at $430, the next AMD option is the 7800 XT, which comes in at $470 and performs about the same as the 6800 XT. It's only a little bit faster. Then you have the 7900 GRE, which is faster, but not mind-blowingly faster than that 6800 XT, and it comes in at an extra $100. Again, if I pull up like a kind of white background here, so blind you, sorry. If I pull up the performance chart here for the 6800 XT, we could go ahead and compare it to the 7900 GRE in terms of relative performance, and you can see that they're saying about 15% faster. 15% faster for $100 more. The value proposition there is a bit questionable, but even if you were considering getting that 7900 GRE, my problem with the 7900 GRE is that it's starting to get fairly close in price to the 4070 Super. Now the 4070 Super, Tech PowerUp has it at 98% of the performance of the 7900 GRE. Now, their performance chart here, I believe, doesn't take ray tracing into account. So let's keep that in mind, but let's go ahead and show some of my testing. So this is the 7900 GRE up against the 4070 Super. In a typical workload like Unreal Engine 5, which a lot of games are using, I'm seeing them basically tied. Here I see the 7900 GRE 1% faster in averages and 2% faster in 1% lows at 1440p epic settings. They both get good performance. This lines up pretty well with what we saw from Tech PowerUp, and again, you can watch my full video if you want to see a whole bunch of other games tested. So at this point, it's okay, well, if they perform the same, and this is $530 and this is $590, because that's where the 4070 Super comes in, about $590, okay, why not just save the $60? Well, at this price point, is $60 a mind-blowing difference? I don't feel like it is. So I would consider these fairly similarly priced, and if they were identical in performance and feature set, I would take the 7900 GRE, but they're not identical in performance and feature set. As soon as you turn on ray tracing, the 7900 GRE goes from being basically tied, or maybe slightly faster, to being noticeably slower. Now, let's look here. So what if we look at 1440p RT overdrive with DLSS quality? So 1440p RT overdrive DLSS quality. Here you're getting over 50 FPS on the 4070 Super, but under 30 FPS on the 7900 GRE. Now, I just realized I'm kind of picking my own nose. I didn't mean to do that, Danielception. Anyway, also kind of a funny face I'm making there. I'll stop getting distracted, guys. Sorry. Okay. Anyway, This is fairly playable. It's not amazing. If you do kick on frame generation, 50 FPS baseline for DLSS 3 frame generation would kind of be my absolute floor. So this isn't ideal, but I think a lot of people would find it fairly usable. And now you're at around, a motion fluidity of about 84 FPS, whereas your responsiveness would feel like more like in the mid 40s to around 50 FPS in terms of latency. Now, you could go down to DLSS balanced, which I don't think I tested in this video, and that would probably get you the rest of the performance that you want. My point is, you're starting to be arguably able to use the heavier ray tracing workloads. Now, it's not amazing, but also you could use lighter ray tracing workloads. For example, what if we use RT reflections, for example? Here, 1440p Ultra RT reflections with DLSS quality. Without frame generation, the 4070 Super is hitting 109 FPS, giving it a 24% advantage over the 7900 GRE. And then, of course, it could kick on frame generation from there. It's a high enough base frame rate that that's a pretty good experience. Now, the 7900 GRE, again, it's not unplayable here, but it is significantly slower. It's also using FSR, which looks significantly more aliased, especially in motion. So you're losing out on the upscaling feature set. You're getting significantly worse ray tracing performance and about the same performance when you're not using ray tracing. I think for all of those advantages, I would spend the extra $60 on the 4070 Super. Now, some people are going to have a very different argument here, and they're going to say the 4070 Super has 12 gigabytes of VRAM, and the 7900 GRE has 16 gigabytes of VRAM, therefore buy the 7900 GRE. And if you're more swayed by that argument, I'm not going to stop you. Go ahead. Perfectly respectable take. Now, my personal opinion is that for 1440p gaming, which is where I'd probably be targeting this class of GPU, 12 gigabytes of VRAM is fine. Would it be nicer to have 16? Yes. But for the types of settings you'd be using here, I'm not seeing a lot of evidence that 12 gigabytes is a huge problem. Now, once the PS6 comes out or something like that, it's more likely to be a significant problem as games target a higher graphical fidelity. But during the current console generation, I'm not expecting a major development in VRAM usage, since game development is generally targeted around the current generation of consoles. And the current generation of consoles we've had for a while now, and we did kind of make a VRAM jump compared to last generation. But that jump's kind of already happened, and 12 kind of feels like you're right on that borderline. I would love to have more, but it's generally okay. So that's where I'm at with it. Anyway, past this point, I've got to say, I'm not a huge fan of going really, honestly, anywhere past this point, but you could make something of an argument for going up to the 4070 Ti Super, partially to solve the VRAM issue. So if you want to buy an NVIDIA GPU with enough ray tracing performance, you kind of have to rule out, and 16 gigabytes of VRAM, you kind of rule out the 4060 Ti 16 gigabyte because it just doesn't have the raw performance. And the 4070 Super, again, some people don't like that 12 gigabyte VRAM buffer, and it's still a little underperformant for the heaviest ray tracing workloads. Whereas the 4070 Ti Super gets us a chunk more performance and gets us up to 16 gigabytes of VRAM, but it costs another $200 to do it, and I'm really not certain that's going to be worthwhile for everybody. We're also starting to get into the pricing tier where, let's say a 5080 or a 5070 Ti comes out around this ballpark price and offers you, 20% more performance in a few months. Are you going to feel terrible about that? Anyway, we'll have to see what happens. Again, we don't actually know what's going to go on with the 50 series price or performance-wise, but we're starting to get into that place where I might feel kind of bad in just a few months if I bought this. That being said, if you are buying right now, the 4070 Ti Super is, like I said, about a little under $800, but compared to the 4080 Super, the 4080 Super comes in at $1,000 right now. And the 4080 Super isn't a mind-blowingly different graphics card, to be honest. They both have the 16 gigabytes of VRAM, and let's say I was doing Alan Wake 2 RT High DLSS quality with frame generation on. Not a mind-blowing performance gap between the 4070 Ti Super and the 4080 Super. They're both delivering, I would say, within the ballpark of the same performance. If you don't have frame generation on, they're both able to deliver either slightly under or slightly over 60 FPS at 1440p RT, maxed out in your path tracing mode with DLSS quality, so pretty reasonable settings. If we go ahead and go to like 1440p RT overdrive mode in Cyberpunk with DLSS quality, again, basically 60 FPS on the 4070 Ti Super, a little over 60 FPS on the 4080 Super. It's not a mind-blowing difference. And it is saving you $200 compared to the 4080 Super. So I think when compared with the 4080 Super, the 4070 Ti Super looks like reasonable value. When compared with the 4070 Super, is it really worth $200 more? I'm going to leave that up to you. You do get the 16 gigabytes of VRAM, and you will be more comfortable with those heavier ray tracing workloads. But let's go ahead and summarize my arguments for the whole video. Remember that my actual recommendation is you wait for the 50 series to launch before buying. Or if you want to buy a 40 series card before the 50 series launches, you wait until we probably have more clearance type pricing as we enter the holiday season and they try to clear out their 40 series stock before the 50 series launches, and you'll probably get better prices than you have available today. That being said, if you are going to buy GPUs, my top 5 standouts were at $200 the RX 6600, at around $350 the 7700 XT, at around $430 the 6800 XT, at $600-ish the 4070 Super, and if you absolutely have to go above that, I wouldn't go much past the 4070 Ti Super at a little under $800. That's my recommendations for October. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope all of you have an excellent day.